All right. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, November 10th, 2022, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, October 27th, 2022, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the minutes.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, October 27th, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 8.
I move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 7.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Move we approve the notice of proceeding associated with agenda item 8.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. That's it.
Yeah.
Here we go. Okay. It brings us to agenda item 9, which is docket 1-CAF-2023. This is the application of the Citizens Utility Board for their most recent budget. And we received additional information because additional estimates came in. But backing up, the first time that we approved CUB's new type of funding was in 2021, and we approved a funding request in the amount of $657,000, $657,489. And we also allocated at that time $239,737 to the establishment of their operating reserve. So the recently passed Act 24 requires us to review both the budgeting and the expenditure of funds by CUB. And we have to ensure that the budget that they file is consistent with state statute and covers the reasonable annual costs of that organization. In their budget, they are requesting $865,336. And what we have seen through requesting additional information from them is that they actually are left with a surplus as it relates to their working capital. And originally, that working capital surplus was over $100,000. But based on information that we received yesterday related to estimates for some of their costs, that working surplus dollar amount went down. So currently, what they are seeking would leave them with a working capital surplus of $52,780. So I went through, I looked at the budget. I'm not inclined to allow them to have that working capital surplus. I think we did a really good job of ensuring that they have operating reserves, and we did that in our last order. But I think based on the information that they provided, I think that it is reasonable to approve their budget, but to disallow or bring down to a net number their working capital. So that puts me at Alt 2. So I would reduce it by $52,780. And then I think it's important, and it was noted in the commission staff memo, that we have quarterly reporting on the working capital and operating reserve balances to better monitor their financial position. I get that we're early in this new funding structure, but I think it's really important that we continue to monitor and take a look at their expenses, and specifically their working capital and their operating reserve balances. So I would add those to the quarterly reports that are required. So for conditions, that would put me at Alt 2, adding that working capital balance into their quarterly reports. Commissioner Nowak?
Yep, thank you. Yeah, when I was reviewing their budget, I had asked staff to go back to Cub and say, because I saw they didn't know their healthcare costs, and, those can change a lot. So we did receive that updated information, as you said yesterday, because I didn't know how much of that working capital, first of all, I wasn't comfortable myself with that working capital balance either, but I didn't know how much of the increase it would eat. And if they didn't know yet, we still even have another month where we have to approve this, but we do know. And it will absorb a portion of that, but I also agree that as long as, and they funded up their reserve balance, so there's really not a need to do that because they are still seeking an overall 5.7% increase from last year. And it just seems appropriate that a group that represents ratepayers, we should be very prudent with every single dollar that we provide to them as well, to be consistent. So I agree with you to reduce their suggested, or their requested budget by the $52,780, and I'm fine with the additional conditions that you add too, because not only should we review it, but since this is the, the purview of the legislature to each year set their budget, I think they may also have an interest in some of that information, so I think that's good.
Okay. Commissioner Hebner?
Yeah, thank you. My initial inclination was to be at Alt 1 on this, just noting that, in the last week, the working capital went from, basically got cut in half, and you run a business, you run a nonprofit, things change. But I can join you guys at Alt 2. I don't think it's, we are early, so it's good to keep track of things, so I can see that perspective. So I'll join you at Alt 2 there, and I agree with you on the conditions. Did you have the operating reserve as well as working capital?
I did.
Okay, yeah. All right, so I'll join you at that as well.
Okay.
In docket 1 CAF 2023, I move that we approve as modified per our discussion the 2023 operating budget for the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin and direct staff to draft an order consistent with our discussion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it brings us to agenda item 10, which is docket 5-BS-264. This is the application of Wisconsin Electric Power Company and Wisconsin Public Service seeking approval from us for a certificate of authority allowing them to purchase the 236.5 megawatt LSP Whitewater cogeneration facility. That facility is a natural gas-fired combined cycle electric generating facility. They are seeking approval to acquire it at a cost of $72,650,000, with each applicant paying 50% of the purchase price and consequently owning 50% of the capacity. A notice of investigation was issued on July 14th of 2022. The notice stated that the commission did not intend to hold a hearing. A hearing was neither requested nor held. So Whitewater is a natural gas combined cycle electric generating facility. It's got a nameplate capacity of 236.5 megawatts. It began commercial operation in 1997 and is currently owned by LSP Whitewater. The facility has sold all of its energy and capacity to the applicants under the terms of a long-term PPA. And the applicants state now that the proposed acquisition will enable them to maintain this source of dispatchable capacity in their generating portfolio while delivering savings to customers rather than seeking an additional PPA. So the provision that governs our decision is 19649. They need to get approval from us. There was a little bit of back and forth about whether 19649 or 19680 were the applicable legal standards. Clearly, it's 19649 because this plant wasn't owned or operated by a utility company. So 19649 is the appropriate legal standard, and under that legal standard, we can refuse to certify the project if it appears that the acquisition will do any of the following: substantially impair the efficiency of the service of the public utility, provide facilities unreasonably in excess of the probable future requirements, or when placed in operation, add to the cost of service without proportionately increasing the value or available quantity of service. And so currently, again, it's been in operation since the late 90s. It's been under a PPA since that time. The applicants did model an extension of the PPA, so they looked at what would drawing out that PPA look like versus an outright ownership of the facility. And the modeling indicates that it is more economical for them to own the plant than to continue under a PPA. As has been the case in a number of acquisition dockets that we've looked at, staff asks the utility to run different modeling scenarios, including different sensitivities, and asking them to use different inputs. And in this case, the applicants did that, and commission staff stress tested those results. And as a result of that stress testing, it was demonstrated that the acquisition of the facility is in the best interest of customers. And so I don't have a concern with this. I think it makes sense. I think this has been a part of the generation portfolio since it's been online. And I think that there is not going to be an impact. There are also analyses done on market concentration that don't raise any concerns for me. And I think that it will and should be a continued part of their generation portfolio. It's a dispatchable resource. I think that continues to be important. Staff has proposed certain conditions. There are 4 of them, which are fairly standard conditions in my mind. And so I am at alternative 2. I would approve this transaction with all of the conditions that were identified in our staff memo. Commissioner Nowak.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think this makes sense for the utility based on the modeling they provided. You said, you had noted that they modeled a variety of scenarios where this would be needed. Staff also had to model it where it wasn't in there. There was also some, I think, and we'll see this in the next one we take up, unhelpful modeling, I'll put it that way, about increasing energy efficiency to a point that's not going to be feasible. So I'm not sure that added to the record or was helpful, but in the modeling that was helpful, looking at different gas prices and so forth, and because, moving forward, we aren't going to be able to rely solely on the solar and wind that they are acquiring and using. We are going to need the dispatchable resources, as you noted. This does make sense from their portfolio standpoint under the modeling. And I also, we also, again, as you noted, had the fun discussion of does this fall under 196.80 or 49? I agree with you that this is a 196.49. For the conditions, I got hung up a little bit on condition 3, just because I thought it was odd it's a fixed price, and I just maybe got hung up too much on some wordsmithing. I think in the end it's fine. First, it just states what we already do. We're not determining recoverability here. We're saying you can acquire it. So it states the obvious that we will determine recoverability in a rate case. The one, it's fixed except for the fuel, which they're buying the plant, the assets, but then they're going to buy a couple other things, and one we don't have that full price on yet. So I guess we'll know at the time of closing what will be in there, and again that will be determined at the recoverability determined in a rate case. So that was the one thing where I didn't know if we should try to get a better handle on what that estimated cost was before we say this can be acquired. I don't think it's going to be as, it's not going to be maybe material to the overall cost. So it wasn't flagged by the company either in its comments. So my inclination, I think this is a belt and suspenders condition. I generally like to not leave those in there, but I would take it out, but we'll see what Commissioner, it would take out the whole condition just because it states what we already know and it will do. So I would take it out, but with that, I would approve the overall project.
Commissioner Hebner?
Yeah, I'm in the same spot as you both on this. This is a very inexpensive capacity project, and that was flagged when we took up West and Rice as part of the generation reshaping portfolio. But this has looked like a very cheap, inexpensive source of capacity since this, option was made aware, we were made aware of this option. So I do think it's in the public interest. I think we understand the GRP, generation reshaping portfolio and plan, has a lot of solar and battery and some wind, and we understand that, on cold winter days, we've got to solve that problem from a carbon perspective. But right now, continuing a plant that's been in operation, it buys them basically 15 years. And technology is going to change, and, we'll see what is needed at that point. But this particular acquisition is, to me, clearly in the public interest. I think not surprising. I found the energy efficiency analysis to be very informative. And I'm going to read the quote that our staff provided in the memo. Commission staff observed the model selecting 100% increased energy efficiency, so that's a doubling of energy efficiency, was part of the optimal generation expansion plan in each sensitivity. So every time they included more energy efficiency, it's cost effective for their customers. I think that's notable. I think that's notable because this is a utility that's going to be spending money on a portfolio of resources. And what this is telling us is if they're not doing more energy efficiency, that grand portfolio is actually going to cost more than it needs to for customers. So I think that's something that this utility and everybody has to wrestle with. Well, how do we do the least cost portfolio? So with that, I'm at Alt 2, and I would include all the conditions. On this particular one, Commissioner Nowak, you flagged number 3. I don't think it was mentioned in the comments on this one. I know it was on the next one to revise that. So on this one, I felt comfortable. The comments didn't address a change, so I was comfortable with all of them. So I would join where you're at.
All
Are
right.
you good with that, Commissioner Nowak?
Sure.
With all of them?
Yeah.
It's your choice.
I'll move in docket 5 BS 264, we approve the proposed application of Wisconsin Electric Power Company and Wisconsin Public Service for a CA to purchase the Whitewater Power Station, consistent with our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, jeez. Okay. All right. Next item is agenda item 11, which is docket 5-BS-265. So on January 31st, 2022, Wisconsin Power and Light Company, Madison Gas and Electric Company, and Wisconsin Public Service Corporation filed a joint application under Wisconsin Statute 196.80 for approval of transfer of ownership shares of the West Riverside Energy Center. West Riverside is located in the town of Beloit in Rock County, and Wisconsin Power and Light is the majority owner and operator of the facility. That facility was approved by the Commission for Construction in docket 6680-CE-176, and I think it's important to note that that docket is the reason we are here. Because as a part of that docket, there was a settlement agreement that was entered into by the applicants. And that settlement agreement contains a provision, an options provision, whereby Power and Light was required to offer to both Wisconsin Public Service Corporation and MG&E an option for ownership, partial ownership of the power plant. So West Riverside has a total nameplate capacity of approximately 727.2 megawatts. And under the requested application, Wisconsin Public Service would acquire 100 megawatts and MG&E would acquire 25 megawatts. Those two companies also retain options to purchase up to another 100 megawatts for Pub Service and 25 megawatts for MG&E respectively. And so the ownership share acquisitions would be, they reflect this option agreement, as I indicated, that the parties entered into as a result of the construction authorization of the plant. Power and Light would retain its majority owner status. They would continue to operate the facility, and then they would simply allocate to Pub Service and MG&E a pro rata share of both the energy and capacity. And then in return, Pub Service and MG&E would be required to provide a pro rata share of administrative, capital, and O&M costs on an ongoing basis. So I think that everyone here, now switching to the different statutory provision, I think everybody in this case can agree that the correct standard for us to review this application is 19680. And that provision is a pretty general provision of the statutes. What it states is that we can find that a proposed action is consistent with the public interest. And if we do that, then we give our consent and approval for what is being requested of us. Historically, because public interest isn't statutorily defined, it's just, if it's in the public interest, you may give your consent and approval. And so over the years, we have historically considered any number of different factors when we are assessing whether or not something is in the public interest. And for me, in this case, the biggest consideration that sort of floated to the top is, what is the impact of this proposed transaction on Wisconsin Power and Light, and specifically on Wisconsin Power and Light's customers? So while there are contractual agreements between the parties, this body is not a party to that agreement. We didn't approve that agreement. We approved the underlying CE docket, but the agreement itself was not submitted to us, nor was it approved. And so while that agreement obligates Power and Light to make the offer, in my review, we are not legally obligated to approve the sale unless it's consistent with that public interest. And again, what is public interest? I think for me, it's looking at the impact on all of the contracting parties, but more importantly, what's the impact on those customers? An interesting part of this case is that, and it doesn't really show up until later, this notion that Pub Service is going to transfer its ownership interest to WEPCO. WEPCO wasn't a party to the underlying contract. And so that made me pause and ask a few follow-up questions. It's just sort of brushed over in the materials that, well, because of capacity positions and need positions, Pub Service is going to transfer its ownership interest to WEPCO, and we'll take care of that in an affiliated interest filing. And that, to me, is troublesome. Then, as you look through the different modeling scenarios, and again, the modeling, I thought, in this case was also done very well. It was robust analysis. There were a lot of sensitivities run, a lot of talk, once again, about sensitivity to natural gas prices. And we've heard this back and forth in a couple of acquisition dockets. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first and foremost, the statement that one of the contracting parties is going to transfer its interest to an affiliate raises the flag that, well, then obviously the person under the contract doesn't need the capacity, nor do they need the energy if they're going to give it to their affiliate. So I don't think that that's in the public interest. The way that I view this case is it's sort of like whack-a-mole. There are all of these generation reshaping plans and blueprints and sort of plans that are talked about in the abstract, but because we don't have IRP here, we look at these in vacuums. And then it's up to us, when we look at each individual case, it's up to us to remember, well, hold on, what was said in that docket? Or wait a minute, I don't remember that coming up in, that issue 3 dockets ago. And that's not good or bad, it's just a statement of what is. But when we're asked to determine whether or not a transaction is within the public interest, you have to take the totality of the circumstances into mind. I don't think the record is fully developed in terms of what the potential negative implications are to Power and Light and its customers. There's confidential information, and I'm trying really hard to not cross that line. So I will keep it at, there are impacts that will occur to Wisconsin Power and Light and by extension, its customers if the sale goes through as planned. So I would like to know more about what those implications are. I don't know that a PPA alternative was analyzed. I don't know that it was looked at. I couldn't find anything indicating that it was. If there is an issue for Wisconsin Power and Light, my concern is that their only option to remedy that issue is to spend more money. And I don't think that that is in the best interest of their customers. So I understand that MG&E is using the project for energy, whereas WEPCO, who again is not a party to the underlying agreement, needs it for capacity. I know that the current owner, Power and Light, is also using it for energy. So that leads me to ask the question, is using Riverside just for capacity really the best use of that facility? And my instinct is probably not. I also don't know that the sub-annual construct, which there was a little bit of information on this, I don't know that the sub-annual construct was analyzed either. And there's a lot of talk about the sub-annual construct within MISO in general, but that analysis wasn't done either. And so I would be inclined to ask for additional modeling in light of that sub-annual contract. And then I would ask for more information as it relates to the net present value. So there are different scenarios. In one scenario, the net present value showed $126 million in benefits to WEPCO, but more than that in costs to Power and Light. And that, again, is troublesome to me. Now, I understand that there were announcements made. There are announcements made about retirements. There are announcements made about how many thousands of megawatts are going to be built in new generation. And then there are announcements about the delays in retirements. which begs the question, how can there be savings to customers under all of those scenarios? And maybe there are savings to customers under every single one of those scenarios, but it doesn't add up to me. It doesn't, I'm not comfortable with it. I think we need additional modeling information. And again, I think MG&E's analysis and modeling shows that this is clearly a win-win for both MG&E and Power and Light. So I'm comfortable approving this transaction for MG&E. I also think that the gas analysis showed that it's a better fit for MG&E than for Pub Service / WEPCO. But what I'm concerned about is this sort of ongoing narrative of, but look at the savings to customers, but look at the savings to customers. Well, that was the story that was told when the generation reshaping plan came out and said, we're gonna retire certain coal units and we're gonna build new facilities. They're gonna be savings to customers, okay. Then it was, well, no, we're gonna delay the retirement of certain units because it's going to lead to savings for customers. And then it's, well, we're gonna come in and we're gonna seek a CPCN to build additional generation because that's gonna equate to savings for customers. And I don't feel comfortable at all that the proper analysis was done as it relates to the transaction for Pub Service. So, I would allow it to go through for MG&E, and I would ask for more analysis to be done on the Pub Service side. And specifically, I would ask for a PPA analysis to be done. I would ask for a subannual construct analysis to be done. And then I would ask for an NPV analysis to be done, looking at what was the world pre-retirement announcement and what does the world now look like post delay of retirement announcement. And I get it. While the combined net book value of the facility will be unchanged, right? Because nothing's happening to the facility itself, there will be transaction costs that are associated. So when I look at an entity that's the majority owner of a facility, and that facility is needed by the majority owner, I would argue that it's not in the best interests of the customers of that majority owner to be selling off such a large portion of the facility, especially when it's not needed for energy. So that's where I land.
Okay, so you're halfway.
Yep.
Okay. I had a different take on this. I think that the modeling, again, that Aurora did, that the Aurora modeling staff, again, stress tested it. Again, they had, I think, them do some unnecessary ones. I don't think we need to do some more. I think it was stress tested, and the analysis from staff was both for the selling entity and for the receiving entities. This makes sense for their larger portfolios. I think that it's, oversimplified. As you said, a lot of the stuff is confidential, so I also want to be careful about why. I mean, on its face, it sounds like it might not be a good deal for the selling entity, but based on the information that I have seen in the record, it still falls to me within the public interest for this transaction to occur. I don't know what more modeling and stress testing they could have done for this moving forward. So I think that it's definitely falling within the public interest for all of the entities to proceed with this. The transfer from Pub Service to WEC, that's all part of the generation reshaping plan, which we have talked about multiple times. And again, I think that those entities under the same corporate ownership are making the best decisions for their customers with the entities that they're owning and the acquisition. So, and again, that was fleshed out in the modeling. So I don't have any issues. There was nothing in here that was flagged for me. The only thing that actually concerned me, again, was let's model unrealistic levels of energy efficiency, because that's just never going to happen and it can't be required to happen. So that was the most concerning thing to me from this docket. So I would approve the acquisition for both, and with the reporting conditions identified for both and as modified by the applicant.
Okay, Commissioner Huebner?
Thank you. 1 second. Well, thank you. My biggest question really about this docket was exactly what you identified, and the numbers that are in the memo, and so I believe those are fine to cite on the record, are on page 13 of the memo. It describes the varying scenarios for WEPCO, indicated NPV savings between 44 to 135 million. But then on page 17 of the memo relating to power and light, our lines aren't numbered, but if you see 55 and 33 year, it's right after that in the middle. This brings the total forecasted revenue requirement impact of the clean energy blueprint, that's power and lights plan, to 258 million. And I think I'm in the same spot as you, Chair, as well. How does kind of the total value or the annual value of the 44 to 135 compare and contrast with the 258? You know?
Right.
And it, you know, we noticed this docket. We didn't do a contested case. There was no party asked for that. But I would agree with you that that analysis would benefit the determination as to the totality of, if you just do the math and take the best $135 million benefit, well, it looks like in total it's a $223 million loss for the state.
Yep. And I think I don't mean to interrupt you, but in my mind, it begs the question of, would the selling entity have gone out and made the same offer? Were they not obligated to do so?
Yeah.
And when I look at the numbers and I look at the fact that it's going to cost its customers more money to do this, I have a hard time believing that they would. And I get it. I mean, they were under a contract, and my understanding is that proceeding was, there were some firecrackers in that proceeding. I get it. It's the result of a different proceeding, but that doesn't change our responsibility to ensure that customers are being looking out for. I mean, I think that should be paramount to everything that we do. And we've had a lot of discussions over the last few years about, well, what's the impact going to be on rates? What's the impact going to be on customers? Shouldn't we be looking out for customers? What's the cost of the transition? And we've all acknowledged that there are going to be costs. This one, the math doesn't add up. Yes, it provides savings to one of the acquirers, but it clearly does not provide savings, at least in what is before us right now.
Right.
The record in front of us indicates that there will be substantial costs to Wisconsin Power and Light.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's obviously it's been a struggle with this one, but there's just numerous factors. Obviously, one of the pieces I talked to staff about is, okay, part of the value for WEPCO and MG&E is they're buying a slice of a plant that was built 6, 7 years ago, or approved 6, 7 years ago as far as price. I know obviously it's been under construction and completion, but, you know, today to build that same plant with the inflation, labor, everything is gonna be more expensive. So I think thinking about, you know, that's kind of a countervailing side to it. Your points about energy and capacity, I mean, I guess I was viewing this as, you know, they're gonna take the capacity that they're gonna buy, that's gonna be beneficial to both of the acquirers as they go into the MISO process and making sure that they have their load covered. So I guess I didn't see the nuance between the energy and capacity, but I think it's a really good point that kind of understanding how the breakdown of capacity benefit versus cone and energy benefit versus LMP or other options is a helpful analysis too. So I'm in that camp of Alt 3 and get more information.
I was here for the fund transfer and settlement for a few years ago with Riverside. And, you know, they are able to go exercise that option, and the contract doesn't say it has to be, I mean, again, staff analyzed it, and I understand you guys want to send it back, and that's fine, but I just want to explain why I'm at where I'm at.
Yep.
It can't be an amazing win-win-win. I mean, I'm not saying that they're losing, but the contract says it has to be offered, and Power and Light, when they entered into that, knew that this could be exercised at when they want, when the other side wanted. So I think that when our own staff looked at it and thought it was a reasonable, because there are other methods for the utility, the selling utility, to secure energy for its customers and capacity, then I think we have to find it's in the public interest.
Yep. So Commissioner Hebner, you're at Alt 3 for both MG&E and Power and Light?
I am.
Okay.
And it's not because I have a bias against one or the other, but just kind of the totality of that Power and Light number. It just kind of left me in that. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay. All right. So then, by my count, we have 2 votes to allow for the transfer between Power and Light and MG&E, and 1 vote to allow for the transfer between Power and Light and WPS.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And just
So
to,
do we want to take a vote, or do you just want to send part of it? Well, no, you're going to do a partial order? How are we going to
right,
handle this one?
so I think what we could do is, you could do an interim order that would give the preliminary authorization to MG&E. And then when the additional analysis is done as it relates to the other applicants, you could do a final decision, which then could, you know, restate the final, or you could not do any order.
Well,
and-
but this is an issue in their friendly
Right.
reopener, and I
Right.
don't want, depending on what we decide there, I don't want to hang that up
Correct.
for them to get their
Right.
rates done for next year based on an interim order, if that would do that.
Yep.
You would have,
Should we take a break
yeah,
and think about it?
yeah.
Can I flag one thing for the chair too?
Yeah.
Is the comments related from the joint applicants, and I think Commissioner Nowak identified that she was comfortable with the language, the alternative language for condition 4.
Yeah.
So that may be something you want to think
Oh.
about in the break, whether you want to join that language or not. So, just flagging
Because
that.
that's, well, that's it, so it relates to both
Right,
Right.
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 entities.
I would not modify it. I would keep it in. I would keep it as is. Oh, why are you laughing?
I'm just
Follow the
thinking through
bouncing
it. I'm
ball.
following the ball.
Yep.
Well,
So we should take a break.
Means it comes out then. Okay. All right, should we just move on to other issues, or, well, I guess up to the chair? And
Let me just have a minute.
Yeah, I think we should take,
Yes, I
Yeah.
want to talk to late staff for a
Yep.
minute, too.
okay,
Okay.
all right. I'm gonna take a break. Okay, we're back from our break. And so I think we're ready for a motion.
Yes. So we'll do a motion only as to MG&E, and we'll issue an interim order as to MG&E, so that when we discuss in the rate case in a few moments, it will be able to, should our decision approve that in the rate case, be included, and they can proceed as this were a full order. That's the hope. And then we're going to lay over the balance, so we won't do a motion as to the other entity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the conditions?
Oh, yeah.
So you agree with the applicant's comments related to the modified condition?
That's correct.
And I will join you with accepting that as it
Okay.
relates to MG&E.
MG&E.
So that so that the interim order is clear.
Yeah,
when
yeah.
It's accepting their modification to that condition.
Okay. So,
And I assume, Commissioner Hebner, you're dissenting from giving interim approval to MG&E.
At this time, based on the record, yes.
Okay, so.
And just, if I could make a comment about a couple things that was part of the discussion before the motion. The first is, as mentioned in Cub's comments, so Chair, you had a list of things you'd like to see as, further analysis. One of the things that I think was valuable was listed on Cub's page 4, and that's related to the forced outages at West Riverside and the resolution of that and how that may impact. So I would just add that to the types of things to be analyzed.
You said capacity accreditation?
Yeah, and the
Yep.
forced outages.
Okay.
Yep. So that's my preference.
Okay.
We're not going to have an order on
Right.
all the little things, but just for the record. And then the second is Commissioner Nowak again mentioned the energy efficiency. Again, in this particular docket, the staff memo on page 12 reads, while the year in which the energy efficiency resource was chosen varied by sensitivity, the 100%, that's a doubling of energy efficiency funding option, was a part of the optimal generation plan for every sensitivity modeled by WEPCO. And I just think that that's very noteworthy as they are looking at a portfolio, again, of resources to meet energy and capacity, that when you do more energy efficiency, it's cost effective. That's all I had to say.
that's a land of unicorns, my friend.
Other states, other utilities are doing it.
We cannot
we can.
require
I know.
customers to do it. And
I understand the
and
law has changed, but we
100%.
used to be able to, and it's in the public interest. It's cost effective. Why would we approve plans that are
Because
more
the government
expensive?
can't mandate people to use less energy. That's why. And the legislature will never double the focus on energy.
We have voluntary programs.
Yeah. So it's a land of unicorns. Okay, docket 5BS 265, I move as to the transfer to West at Riverside Energy Center from Wisconsin Power and Light to Madison Gas and Electric Company, that we approve that subject to the conditions and condition number 3 or 4 as modified by the applicants.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
And then the matter's laid over.
Great.
All right, okay. That brings us to docket number, agenda item 12, which is docket 5440 LS-100. This relates to Shorewood Municipal Water Utilities application seeking approval to implement a financial assistance program for replacing lead service lines. So this is the latest in a number of applications that we've seen under the statute that allows public water utilities to apply to the commission for authorization to provide financial assistance to the owner of a property for the purpose of assisting the owner in replacing customer-side water service lines containing lead. That financial assistance may be in the form of grants and loans to property owners. And there are some very explicit statutory provisions that govern what the financial assistance can be. and the different steps that the city, town, or village has to enact before the utility can provide that customer assistance. So in this case, Shorewood Municipal Water Utility is a Wisconsin water public utility. It provides drinking water to approximately 3,529 retail customers. Based on their application, they estimate that there are approximately 2,974 utility-side lead service lines and 3,170 customer-side lead service lines in their distribution system, which is about 87% of their system's service lines. They are requesting to offer financial assistance so that they can remove those lead service lines, and they will complete approximately 150 replacements per year over the next 21 years. Pursuant to the statute, all property owners will be eligible for the financial assistance. The utility did file a clarifying comment because in our memo, it was flagged about the requirement under the law that says if you're going to provide financial assistance, it cannot exceed 50% of the cost. And then the loan cannot be forgiven by the utility or the municipality, but that if the utility is intending to provide financial assistance as a percentage, that percentage has to be the same. And if they're going to provide it as a specified dollar amount, that amount must be the same. So as it came to us, they set a $5,000 maximum in addition to the 50% limitation on grants. And commission staff had indicated that we could condition our approval on eliminating either the grant cap or that the percentage cap. And subsequent to that, Shorewood filed with us. They agreed to lift the cap but remain at 50% of cost. So my review of the comments that they provided in response to our memo would bring them into compliance. So I will also say that I was tripped up by this memo. I went for Alt 1, and then I had to reread it, and Alt 1 is really denying it. So that was a new one for me. For this one, I'm at Alt 2. I find that their application need not be denied because it is sufficient. So it was deemed incomplete at first, and then the utility did provide the information that was requested. So for our first decision point on page 12 of the memo, I'm at Alt 2. Commissioner
Oh,
Nowak.
yeah, we have to do those. Yeah. Yes, L2.
Commissioner Huebner?
Yep, I'm alternative 2.
Okay. The next discussion point is related to the provision of the statute that as it relates to either having the same percentage or the same dollar amount available. So for this one, I'm at Alt 1, and I'm at Sub-Alt A. And again, I'd leave it up to the utility, but they understand what modification is necessary to comply with the law, and they've already agreed to do it. So I'm at Alt 1, Sub-Alt A.
Yeah, their comments back, they said, okay, we'll lift the grant. So the grant still is going to be at 50% for everybody, correct?
Correct.
But now they're willing to go up to 100% loan for the balance?
Correct. After the grant.
After the grant?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page with that, because I thought then they were lifting both, and I thought then they were going to 100% funding, through grant or loan, which we have done,
Right.
too. So, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm in the same spot, Alt 1, so are you okay with them offering the 100% loan? So this is basically as
After
written,
their grant assistance.
after the 50%. Well, right, so it's 50% grant, and then they could get a loan for up to the rest.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what they're
and I'm okay with that.
clarifying things
Yep.
said, yeah.
Yep.
It just
Yeah.
has to be uniform.
Correct.
Right, and I'm okay with that. Yep, so I'll join you. Yep.
I mean, I don't know if that changes, it probably does. They said this was gonna be a, what, 1.3%, would comprise about 1.5% of the proposed rate increase. That'll probably increase.
You would
If,
think.
if
Yeah.
they can loan more,
Yeah,
it may.
yep. I mean, I know they're going with the loan when they do their, it's under the umbrella of their assistance that when they have to do the mains and so forth, but one would suspect that the cost goes up a touch.
Correct. Agreed.
Most of the pipes in this utility system do seem to be in need of replacement.
Right.
Yes, as a former resident of this municipality, I can attest. Pipes are old.
All right, sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So really, subalternative A is we're saying you can do 100% of the loan for customers after a grant, and they could do a 50% grant.
Right.
Which
Just remove the
removes the
cap.
cap.
Yeah.
Because we kind of had an or in there.
Right.
and I
We
just-
did.
Just
Yes.
make clear that it can be both of aspects of that.
Well, it sounds like that's what
They want to
That's what
do.
they've agreed.
they kind of amended their,
Right.
their clarifying comments kind of amended their original comments.
So,
But I think whether we land at 50 or 100% totals, it's just got to be the same number.
Exactly.
And they requested 100.
Right. In addition to lifting the $5,000 maximum for the grant amount, we would also concur with the increasing the loan amount of up to 100% after grant assistance.
I'm comfortable with that. That's what I support. Yep. Okay.
Ready?
you've got a couple
I
more.
think we have one
Oh.
more.
Two more.
15.
I'm ready.
All right, page 15, compliance with Wisconsin statute 196.3723E1. I'm at alt 1.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay, and then the potential conditions on page 17. Alt 1 identifies 8 conditions. I only found 7. So
Ah, good catch.
I would take 7 of them, not 8, because,
It's the
Yeah.
condition to be named later.
yes,
Yeah.
TBD. Oh, here it is. So I'm at alt 1, and I would change 8 to the number 7.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
Okay. And now we're ready. In docket 5440 LS 100, I move that we approve the application of the Village of Shorewood as a water utility to implement the financial assistance program for customer-side lead service line replacement in the Village of Shorewood pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Next up is the petition of Midwest Renewable Energy Association. Oh, this is interlocutory appeal, sorry. This is in the MREA declaratory ruling docket. We have an interlocutory appeal from the Wisconsin Utilities Association. There was some testimony that was struck by the ALJ, and WUA would like for us to relook at the decision made by the ALJ and to allow that information to be a part of the record. There's a couple of procedural considerations, so as a threshold matter, they missed the deadline, WUA did. However, we have the discretion under the code to take up an interlocutory appeal on our own motion, and we've used that before. So from a procedural standpoint, I would consider their interlocutory appeal on our own motion. So that's alt 3 on page 6.
Yes, I agree. MREA spent quite a bit of time telling us how we don't have the authority to do this. We do. I didn't have the time to go back and look if they've asked us to use that particular code provision that we're going to use now to open our own motion, but we have that.
Yes, okay. Commissioner Huebner?
Yeah, I was fine with alt 1, but I'll join you at alt 3. to just consider it out of time and
On our
enlarge
own.
the time.
On our own
On our own, but I'm fine with, it's the same result, so I'll
Okay.
join you at alt 3.
Okay. Okay, so then moving past the procedural matter, we get to the substance of the argument as to whether or not that testimony should be allowed into the record. WUA asserts that the testimony and exhibit were properly filed as rebuttal. The MREA is arguing that it's not rebuttal-y enough. I disagree. It should come as no surprise that I'm a big fan of a fulsome record. I think the more information we have, the better. I think that our process is a little different. And yes, typically in pre-filed rounds of testimony, your rebuttal is limited to the issues that were raised in the pre-filed direct. I think that the testimony that WUA wants to enter does appropriately address issues that were raised, and that they're well within the scope and that they will have probative value. And so I would allow WUA's testimony into the record. And then I understand that there's a time crunch. And I think that it's in the interest of creating a record, again, that will be helpful to us in deciding whatever we're going to decide. And there's been a lot of chatter about what that decision is. And I think it's really important to remind people that at least I don't make it a practice to predetermine what the outcome is going to be until I've read the actual record in the case. So I have no problem extending the timeline here. I think that the timeline to reply can be moved out to November 16th, as our memo considers. And then I also think reply briefing is fine. I mean, I'm interested in hearing what the arguments are. And my intention is never to cut off the arguments. My intention when we talked about this in getting something back to us was I was trying to deter all of the parties from engaging in frivolous motions practice. And I think by and large that has happened. But it's not by any means a hard and fast deadline. And so I think it's fine to extend the deadline for filing replies to November 16th, or if either of you think it should be a later date, I'm fine with that. And then I would actually allow reply briefing in the interest of getting all sides' positions onto the record. So for that, I'm at Alt 1, and I'm at Sub-Alt A, and I would use that November 16th for replies, and then allow the judge to determine a schedule for additional rounds of briefing. Commissioner Nowak?
Yeah, I agree. This was clearly within the scope of rebuttal testimony. It was raised by the applicants and other parties, so that wasn't a close call that this fell. It seemed like the ALJ was looking for some magic words to appear, and that the subject itself was clearly within the scope. It is definitely probative, so I would allow it. I'm fine with extending the deadline, and since you're in the mood, we can remove the December 1st deadline, since it's not a hard and fast one. I think in having the record more full and parties more time, we can remove that one too.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think it would be necessary, especially if there's going to be briefing allowed.
Yeah.
So the December 1st deadline, I'm fine with eliminating or extending, there's got to be some endpoint, for this case, obviously. 9300 DR 105. Okay, Commissioner Huebner?
I'm in the same spot as you both. I mean, I think I was at the hearing. I thought, the judge's ruling was fine, and he's an ALJ and he knows what he's doing, but my lean is, as you said, Chair, to get as much into the record as we can, and I think that this, we can allow this in and should go ahead and do it under Alt 1. And the schedule adjustments, I'm fine with the November 16th reply and adding a reply.
Yeah, I just one clarifying, MREA, because they moved to strike the testimony, has not had the opportunity then to file any rebuttal.
Yeah.
Is that what you're kind of referring to in the reply, or was that kind of the general reference to maybe have the ALJ look at the schedule.
Yeah.
And in light of this piece, and relief from the December 1, get replies in, but then if there's further process that needs to be done following, in light of today's ruling, whether that be a round of testimony
Right.
and then briefs.
So just, I'm fine with that. So this came in on rebuttal, and there was a rebuttal. There was a,
But I don't believe that there
They weren't.
was Sir rebuttal on this because they had moved to strike
Oh, okay.
this, is
Yeah.
what I was referring to. Sorry,
Yeah.
just was off around.
no, I'm with you, so, okay. So I guess they could they have moved to strike and provided Sir rebuttal? That would have been unnecessary if it was,
They
So,
could have.
I guess
or
we
they-
can just find out if the party wants to respond, or if anybody wants to respond and needs that. I don't know. I'll leave it in your hands, if we just give the
But I think-
ALJ
I think
the
we can-
discretion to decide how to proceed. Okay, so that's adding sub-alt B to our,
No.
does that add sub-alt B? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I guess there's two different things, right? You can extend the time for the reply, and the evidence can be used, but you still, MREA hasn't had a chance to respond to that, whether they will or they won't. So there may be some further process. So I didn't necessarily think of those as being both. I thought that, if
I mean, at some point, we gotta say,
Right, pencils
there's gonna
down.
be 5 Sir replies and 5 Sir rebuttals. And
Right.
this is already, so,
Right,
the other alternative is let the briefing complete on what the record was at the time without this in, and then kick the balance of this piece to the ALJ to figure out what else is needed on this, other than admission of this piece of evidence into the record.
right.
I don't like that.
Okay.
I think the decision is, first, we're granting the interlocutory appeal, and the rebuttal testimony and exhibit will be allowed into the record. Then the opposing party has the ability to respond to that evidence, since they didn't, right? I mean, yes, they could have, but they didn't. And then it's pencils down. And then all parties have had the opportunity, and to the extent that WUA and other parties want to use what was provided by MREA in response to the Heiser testimony, they can include that in their brief. But I worry that if we start bifurcating and it's gonna lead to a lot of unnecessary confusion.
That was my question, so.
So, where are we?
So I would extend the deadline for filing replies, because that was the first issue, right? Is we were bumped up. So it's fine to extend it to the 16th, and then the ALJ should allow for an additional response to that.
Okay.
And then you're done, and then you move to briefing. Right?
well, they're already
They're-
briefing.
that's my point.
That's the problem.
Well, yeah.
Right,
Your
they're
next
already
round of
briefing.
briefs.
Right.
So maybe it's more of a sub-alt B, modify the schedule to provide for additional procedure and deadlines to address the inclusion of the testimony.
Why don't we just not allow this to reply, and if they feel they need it, they can move, just like these applicants have. Because that's the only thing before us, is that portion, so, and it is rebuttal, so they're,
Right, but we have the ability to consider whether or
Yeah.
not it's appropriate to
I
allow
know,
it.
but-
And I think we just say, it's fine, and then you're done.
Well, then perhaps what you might want to consider is saying, all right, if you want to respond to this, file whatever testimony, and then extend the brief.
Yes. I'm fine extending the briefing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Because they've got to get that testimony in
Yeah.
before it can be briefed.
So did you
Verify.
want to set a date for when that testimony is and then push the brief out? Because if they filed the you're just assume they'll get it done before the 16th. To the extent parties want to address both sides of this in the reply.
Well, they already have it. Why don't we just have them
What I'm-
reply at the same
Right.
time?
Right.
They
I
already
get-
seen his testimony. Have them reply by the 16th, have the survey rebuttal in by the same time.
Right.
As the brief.
I don't understand where the disconnect is.
I'm just trying to get the record set.
Yeah.
Before we finish all the briefing.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what I
that's
was
the
trying to
problem.
do.
Right.
So if you're saying this Heiser testimony comes in, then to the extent parties want to do SIR rebuttal in response to the Heiser testimony, that is due on X date. And then everybody can respond to that and finish the rest of the briefing at that point in time.
Correct. So you need 2 dates. You're looking for 2 dates from us? Or can we allow the judge to determine those dates? I mean, the November 16th is what was in our memo.
Right, and I think that was, if you just wanted to not allow further process to respond to the new testimony.
I think it's appropriate to allow for a response to the new testimony. So whatever that looks like. I don't know if that means you extend it then all out and you pick up with briefing after November 30th?
Yeah,
Does
you
that
can just
make-
give an end date and then tell the ALJ to set whatever other deadlines or process.
Yeah.
To get reply briefs done by X date.
Right. Yeah. What's the current deadline for
I was
reply
looking up
briefs?
right now. Tomorrow.
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 Oh, okay,
Yeah,
so.
that's why,
What's
yeah.
the date today?
The 10th.
10th. All right, so you push it out a month? December 10th?
I don't think they need that long for
No?
5 pages of reply.
No, I mean for the completion of, yeah.
The responding of this piece back.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I push it out 2 weeks. I mean, I don't think they need that much time to, I don't care.
Yeah, we just run into
Yeah,
Thanksgiving.
when is Thanksgiving?
So maybe you're looking at, instead of the 16th, you're looking at November 30th is
Yeah,
the next.
Okay,
reply we used to do the 30th.
So set the schedule so that all the briefs are done by the 30th? Yeah,
November 30th.
okay, that's fine.
is that good?
That's fine, the ALJ can work within those dates, and the parties can work within those dates to figure out what response, if any, needs to come in light of this testimony now being admitted to the record.
Okay, okay. Good.
And if for some reason MREA stipulates they're not going to respond, then the ALJ can work with the parties to find the date, if sooner is better, so that's my thought. But I'm with, okay.
It's fun. Okay. In docket 9300 DR 105, I move that we grant leave on our own motion to file out of time the testimony that was filed by Wisconsin Utility Association, allow for an extended briefing schedule pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, agenda item 14, docket 3270-UR-124. Commissioner Nowak is leading this discussion.
I am. Okay, this is the limited electric reopener for Madison Gas and Electric. Last year, the utility reached a settlement with a number of parties regarding its filing for last year, but also at the same time agreed to come in for test year 2023 on a limited number of issues, as well as incorporate their fuel costs. So the discussion today will be regarding the limited number of items that were identified in the order approving the settlement, and that was also included in the settlement agreement. Issue number 1 in our decision matrix is really just more, I don't know if it's necessary to make a decision on. It's more just setting the table and telling us the roadmap of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm actually just going to dispense with it because we'll just dive right into the issues. The first three series of questions relate to force majeure costs at 3 facilities that the utility either has some or all ownership in. And I'm going to take them up all together because we have been given, for the public part, an aggregate number of the force majeure clause, and the specific number for each facility is confidential. So I think it's also just easier to talk about it in the aggregate because the reason for the notification and the request to have the force majeure costs included are the same also for each of the 3 facilities. So the first one relates to acceptance of force majeure cost increase at Badger Hollow 2. And again, they have cited issues related to the pandemic, global supply chain events, labor market, et cetera, that have, and there is information in the record more about that. They did make their filings on time pursuant to the order. And for all 3 of these, am going to accept that aggregate amount to include that into the rates for next year. I do believe that they made a case that these are appropriate to be included, and that these were costs outside of the utility's control. So for 1A, B, and C, I am at alternative 1.
I agree with you. I'm at the same spot.
I'm at alternative 1 as well. Thanks.
Issue 1D relates to the discussion we had earlier today on the interest in Riverside Energy that we approved with our oral discussion. Of course, the final approval will appear in an order, and that is what will govern. But contingent on that becoming a final order and approved, I think it is absolutely appropriate to include their interest in the West Riverside Energy Center into their rates for the next calendar year, so I'm at alternative 1.
You said appropriate.
Appropriate.
Okay,
Oh, yeah, I did.
All right, okay. Yes, I agree with you. I'm at alternative 1.
Yep, I agree.
Issue 1C is, relates to the Inflation Reduction Act and any impacts that, of course, are unknown at this time, what they will be, whether it's going to be a negative or positive, and whether there should be a deferral with that. I think this does fall within the deferral protocols about what is necessary, what we can defer. I would also defer at the small, short-term interest rate, small interest rate too.
I agree.
So alternative
Yep.
1,
Alternative 1 at the short term.
yes.
Yep,
Yep,
agreed.
I'm at the same spot.
Issue 1F is whether or not the commission, so as, again, staff did do its audit, and on the non-monitored fuel cost side of things, they identified a purchase power agreement that the utility had with WEPCO, and it was, I don't know for how long it was in, but it was in for capacity for several years. Its last full year of operation, if I'm remembering correct, was 2021. It had a partial, I think it had 5 months they had with that in calendar year 2022, which represents the $7.1 million. That the utility still included the $7.1 million in its test year rate case for the PPA capacity that was approved in the 2020 test year. This one is interesting because this is a limited reopener, and had it not been for the, so I went back and looked at what was the language of the settlement agreement and what was put into the order approving that settlement agreement. And it identifies, I have too many pages here. The settlement terms include a provision that retail electric rates for 2023 will be subject to a limited reopener filing for generation assets, including purchase power agreements and any changes that may occur with the federal tax code. So we just had a discussion about some potential changes with the tax code. it does say purchase power agreements. I know there was discussion from the utility that they didn't think this fell within the scope of the limited reopener, but I have a hard time, and I'm interested in hearing my colleagues' point on that, getting past the purchase power agreement, since this clearly is one, and that it should be included. And they're doing their job, I get that argument. What I am even more wholly troubled by is the stand-down stance from the entities that represent ratepayers, that it seemed to have an acceptance of inclusion of $7 million in rates for a contract that is no longer in existence. I really scratched my head at particularly the acquiescence of the Citizens Utility Board for inclusion of that in rates. So my inclination is to not include it because I'm reading the exact language of the order. So I would take the 7.1. It's the non-monitored side. If those words weren't there, they have an argument. I don't know how you have an argument with those words sitting there.
So you're at Alt 1, which
I
is
never look
staff's
at the
proposed.
alternatives. I don't. Yes.
Yep, agree 100%. And not just Cub, but Sierra Club
Yeah, all
and
of
Wisconsin
them.
Industrial Energy Group. I mean, talk about a head scratcher. Yeah,
I think my surmise was that this was part of the settlement, and, there's always give and take, but then why did you put the words there?
yeah. And I respect advocating for your position if you're the applicant, but wow, it's written in black and white.
Yeah.
It's pretty darn obvious. So yeah, I am at Alt 1.
Yeah, you said it all. I'm at Alt 1. Thanks.
Issue 2 are a number of uncontested items that are adjustments, that are staff adjustments to the monitored fuel costs. I did not receive indication from our council that all of the uncontested items were going to be were accepted, so I would like to check if one of my colleagues wants to, does anyone want to discuss any of the uncontested items?
I do have
Okay.
one of them, yeah.
On this one or a different one?
On this one, the question really is number 1 there. And I don't know if staff's just gonna adjust that later, but this is removing applicant's proposed ownership of West Riverside from the fuel cost side. And so since we approved it, that was my question on this one, is I think we might have to adjust.
Oh, yeah, because staff didn't have that in there, yeah.
Right, staff had
Yeah,
removed
yeah,
it, and now it's
yeah,
happening,
yeah,
so
they'll
now
have to
we
put the
want
fuel
it
cost
back
in. Yeah, so that'll change by about $1 million.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just wanted to make sure that was
On
flagged.
this particular one.
Yep, okay,
Yes, I
all
have
right.
another,
Okay.
but, yeah.
I don't
Okay.
have any
Okay.
uncontested issues that I
Okay.
want to discuss.
Issue 3 is also uncontested, relating to more adjustments in the fuel cost model. Is Commissioner Huebner's?
Yeah, it's 3 and 3A that I wanted to discuss.
Okay.
And basically, it's because coming in with staff's adjustment to this, we were down to $2 million, which is a very low change. But the final numbers here, included in Exhibit PSC Field 2, the predominant driver here is this coal bid adder, and that's the subject of issues 3 and 3A, and that's approximately $25 million. And I know that there's a lot of discussions that have been happening between staff and the 3 owners. And I didn't really talk about it with the force majeures at the front, but as coming into this case, to me, is this question of, what risks are in their control and what risks are outside of their control? And what's the appropriate things to be included in these rates versus what is the business risk that they are operating under? And I just did not feel comfortable throwing this $25 million in wholesale as a bid adder. I understand where it come from. I understand the limitations to the fuel availability. My inclination, though, is to try to go lower on that. I don't necessarily say remove it, but what we want to do is incentivize them to figure out how to run that plant and not incur this full 25 million. Because this is going to be a substantial increase. So I don't know if either of you two had thoughts about that field 2 and particularly the coal bid adders and the $25 million and whether, I just wasn't comfortable throwing that in here at the end. I mean, I would prefer to put a little more pressure on the applicant to find whatever ways they can, whether it's through Columbia or other agreements, to keep fuel costs down, especially at this time.
It is a large number, but we have, there's a lot of supply chain issues, and I just
Yeah,
heard on the
no.
news today,
Yep.
a railroad is delaying their strike, and I thought, oh, good, and then they said, no, to coordinate with the other companies. I'm like, well, that's not great. So there is some tough times coming here, and, we're going to talk a little bit later, too, about the total fuel. Yeah, these are uncomfortable numbers,
Yes.
and
That's why I
I
flagged
trust
it
that
here.
the utility, yeah, no, I hear you, but I trust that the utility is finding ways to do that.
But to
No one
me,
likes
it's if
to
we
have these
authorize
numbers.
it, then it's baked in, right? If
But-
we authorize it, then
Yeah, but-
they're not going to have an
yeah,
incentive to
yeah.
figure out some way to reduce it. And that's why I wanted to have the conversation, because to me, I think with the rates that we're looking at for this particular utility and adding in 25 million plus talking with accounting staff, that's not really the number. That number is actually grossed up for taxes. So you're looking at, 40% higher than that. That I felt like this is an opportunity to say, well, we might find that those are prudent later and have to authorize an increase, but I would rather start low and let the year play out and see where we land.
I'm scanning the room for Klaus, and I don't see him. But I can tell you that, based on experience, the utilities go to the mat with the rail companies in terms of negotiating and making sure that they are getting the best deal possible. So a couple of things. I mean, the applicant did agree to use, that we will do our final run using the coal delivery information, right? That's available to us. We can't do anything. The information is what the information is. I completely respect your position in trying to control costs, but I can tell you from experience that the utilities do not sit by idly and take, especially when it comes to the negotiation and the execution of coal contract deliveries. And the second thing I think it's important to point out is that there will be a reconciliation.
Yes.
Right?
Yep, totally
So,
agree.
to the extent
I
that.
get that.
To the extent that actuals differ from what we are approving, the savings, if there are savings, will go back to customers. So for those two reasons, I was comfortable.
Yeah, and I don't know what we, just pick a number then to lower it again. I mean,
Right.
that was the 25 was a back and forth discussion with staff and the utility, and we would just arbitrarily pick a lower number just to put the pressure on. And as the chair said, they're doing their job, and this is going to be a tough year, tough year.
Okay, so I'll just be dissenting on 3. And
Okay.
I think it's 3A is related, but go ahead. I didn't have anything on 3A.
You don't have anything on 3, I don't either.
I don't either.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
And
so that's 3B.
outlined in the testimony, okay. So 3B relates to Casper. Haven't heard that one in a while, but should the commission include in the final production fuel cost model the impact of revisions to the cross-state air pollution rule, which the EPA is currently proposing and revising again? The utility noted it will, potentially materially impact the fuel cost based on the latest staff exhibit. It was included in there, if I'm reading that correct. And I do think it should be in there. It was, it wasn't a massive significant amount. If it were, I would think we'd maybe want to do something like a deferral, but I think it's appropriate. Again, this is all trued up later. So I think it's appropriate to include it in there.
Okay, I was actually at alt 3. I think it's speculative, and there's also the provision in the rules that if there's a material impact, that utilities can come to us during the pendency of the fuel year. And so I didn't think it was appropriate to include it, so I was at alt 3.
Yeah, I was oscillating between alt 2 and 3, and my understanding is, basically it's not known at this time. It's going to be known in August of 2023 is when the emission allocations are going to come out. So, a lot can happen between here and then. So I'm going to join you at alt 3, Chair.
Yeah, and the reason it's speculative. I didn't know if it was any more or less speculative than
Yeah,
the Inflation
that.
Reduction Act, and
Yeah.
we're allowing deferral there. So, to me, it made sense to be consistent.
Okay.
But, okay. Issue 4 is the update, and it's uncontested on the NYMEX.
I was good with the uncontested.
Yeah,
there.
okay. Issue 5 was flagged. So in the settlement agreement from last year, the agreement allowed for a modification to the fuel tolerance band from the 2 to 1% for only 2021 monitored costs. It was silent as to 2022 monitored costs, and
23, right?
so it was just proposed to carry it over from the settlement. I didn't vote for the settlement. If it was in there, I would say yes, it was carried. It was just silent, and to me, there's no. I'm not a big fan of moving the band, and the parties agreed for 2021. They didn't agree for it and 2022. They didn't agree moving forward, and there's nothing here to say that we should go back to keep it at 1. So 2% makes sense to me. So I'm an alternative 1.
I agree.
I'm sorry, 2.
Alt 2,
Two,
yep,
yeah.
go back, right.
Yeah.
So 50 might be the new 40, but 1% is not the new.
I hope 50 is the new 40.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, Commissioner Nowak. It's a nice try, but it wasn't contemplated. And so I'm at alt 2.
Okay. I was at alt 1 on this. I thought it seemed like it was in the spirit of the settlement agreement, and that's what I was going with there. So that's fine. Okay.
Issue 6 is the cost of service studies, and the only thing that threw me off on this one is I told staff they put the charts, the X and Y, different. How it's normally presented to us.
Oh,
But-
is it?
Yeah.
That's funny, yeah. I just noticed that too. Okay.
But I think that the range here is, we have a very good range of cost of services presented to us. And as always, I think we should leave all of them in and not cherry pick one to completely follow. So I'm at alternative 2.
I agree.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, here's where it gets fun. Revenue allocation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, so here's what happened. The utility initially comes in with a 4.38 rate increase, but based on the adjustments, and we've just still made some adjustments here today, just ballpark figures, the staff audit put it at 0.51. So the utility comes in, does their revenue allocation based on the 438, but then they modified it based on the lower revenue allocation, but using the same, they reran it. They didn't modify it because they carried over the same proportions for each customer class. So that's what you see in the column that we're looking at. It was, I think, in Krieger's 3 exhibit where, residential, for example, was at a 0.53, and CP1 was at a 0. But then enter the discussion from WIG where, they said, well, hey, a lot of the reasons why the revenue requirement went down related to fuel, and the benefit of that should still be maintained by the largest users. So they propose revenue allocations that between 0 and no greater than 0.2% based on, where we end up in a revenue allocation between what staff had proposed and what the utility initially had proposed. But based on, and CUB agreed with that. It has a it has an impact to the residential class, but CUB, again, felt that carried over with the settlement agreement in the spirit of that. But then we've got some changes that occur, and the biggest thing that is gonna, make these numbers very different is adding in the fuel costs, because when we do that final, we gotta do a combined. And so we just got that updated exhibit, and I should probably pull up. So I had staff rerun let me log back in. Rerun the revenue allocation, because initially I was fine with CUB's proposal, but the total combined revenue allocation is going to lead to a much larger than 4.38%. So what do you do with that? So I took, and I believe that they had agreed to this in their testimony, I used that methodology they proposed up to a 4.38%. And then after that, the fuel was added in as we typically added in on a kilowatt hour basis. So it insulates a bit still, which is what the parties had agreed to, that amount for the CP customers. But then after that, it's allocated on how we typically allocate fuel. And so what that looks like, and I had them run it with and without the 7.1 million in the, do I have it up? I do. 7.1 million in the non-monitored that we've all agreed, yep. So, and I said, tell me then what's this gonna mean? And they didn't run it for everyone because fuels allocate a little differently, and they've got to back out some things like the green power and so on and so forth. So anyway, I guess first, are you guys okay with that methodology? Like, I was okay with the WIG proposal, but then, so I took that as my starting point and then added on the fuel after that on the normal kilowatt hour basis. Are you okay with that methodology?
Yes.
For all, okay,
Yes, I am.
okay.
Yeah, I agree too.
Okay.
So up to the 4.38
Yes,
total,
yeah.
CP1
Yeah.
only gets the 0.2.
0.2, yeah,
Yep.
up
And
to
then
that.
everything
And then
after
after
that,
that, fuel
it's
is-
kilowatt
yeah.
hour for every
Yeah.
class, yeah. That's what I was supporting.
And I think they had kind of forecasted that with the fuel prices coming in, 4.38 would be a gift to be at the maximum. But,
Yeah.
and of course, we're above that, so they said if it goes above. So, so what does this mean for the general public? I mean, we all know fuel costs have skyrocketed. This is not set in stone, but for an average residential customer, it's going to be in the ballpark of a 9% total increase. So from their initial file to where we're at, and that's just, that's on the fuel. A lot of that's due to the fuel, which is a pass-through, which is not, and the utilities control, they're not earning. So, but it's going to fluctuate a little bit. But just so you guys, and I know the public will be wondering, last year, the utility, I think it was 8.8 or somewhere in there. So we're looking at that was with fuel again. So for residential, so this is another year. As I said, this is going to be tough for everybody. But you have to have the fuel to keep the plants running and keep your house warm. And so Are we good?
I was fine.
I'm fine with that allocation, and I think your numbers, thank you for having them run.
Yeah.
You know, that reinforces my position on issue 3 and why I was less comfortable just throwing that rate increase on to customers, because I'm hopeful that the utility is going to find a way. Even in these hard times, you know, the customers don't operate the plants and they have no ability to strike a deal with railroads. The company is in charge of that. The company's earning a 9.8% return on their assets. They have a risk involved in their business. You know, they're going to have to find a way, and I think us putting a little more pressure on them to get that done would have been helpful, but I understand where you're at on those. So did you cover like issues 7 through, how many issues did you just cover, Commissioner Nowak? Just 7? Because I know some of it's a little interrelated with some of our other ones.
Definitely.
There's only 7.
Right?
Yep.
There's only 7.
Okay.
And 8 is the rate,
Yeah.
yeah, 8 is the rate design, and I was fine with the applicants, so I'm at alternative 1 on rate design.
My understanding was we needed to do alt 2 on that because of the WIG proposal. And that's where the applicant was as well, was alt 2.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make
Right,
sense?
That's right, because they-
Okay,
That's where I am.
so we're at alt 2?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Issue 8, yep.
Yep. Issue 9 is the monthly fixed charge. So again, this is something that grew out of the settlement agreement where it was lowered, the fixed charge was lowered in the settlement agreement and to $15 a month in 2023. But it also said, the commission had said, come back with a cost study analysis of where it should be. And interestingly, I mean, this is a little bit like cost of service, depending on where you put in the buckets, but, you know, the utility showed that under their analysis, the fixed charge could actually be much higher. Sierra Club and Renew, of course, argued that it should be much lower because they view that, what goes into those buckets much differently. And so I believe that we should stick with what is in the, we're not going to solve the issue of fixed charges here today and what should go in it. I think that we should stick with what was in the settlement agreement, so I'm at alternative 1.
Okay.
I was in the same place.
Okay, and I was at alt 2, and which is the same dollar amount, $15 as the settlement, but I would ask them to keep doing that analysis. And number 1, they've figured out how to do it, what the buckets are, and their spreadsheets are set up, and I think it's going to be asked. So we can wait for that in discovery for the next case, but my thought was just, I think Renew argued administrative efficiency. I think that makes sense. It's going to be asked for, so they may as well just provide it when they file their case, but we're in the same spot on $15, so.
I suspect it will come up in data requests and.
Yes, I'm sure it will. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
So will you be
That's good.
dissenting?
I'm at alt 2, so yeah.
The final one we've really answered is how the fuel should be allocated, so alternative 2.
Right.
Correct.
Yep.
Agreed.
Same spot based on that discussion, yep. Okay.
Are we good?
We're good.
Kind of staff.
Okay. I'll also then move in docket 3270 UR 124. We approved the application for the limited electric and reopener and the fuel case for Madison Gas and Electric pursuant to our discussion today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We are now going to recess the open meeting, go into closed session under Wisconsin statute 19.851G to discuss a litigation matter with our legal counsel, and we will reconvene after our discussion.
Move that we go into close pursuant to Wisconsin statute 1985.
1G.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. are back in the open meeting pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85. And we had a discussion while we were in closed session, and we are now done. Yeah.
Yeah. I move that we adjourn, or you don't have anything else? Okay. Move we adjourn until Thursday, November 17th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Go get your brats, everybody.